Hey, class. I'm gonna wait for you guys to come on in. Just let me know if you're here in the chat. And we can get started. Hey, Nakara, what's up, dude? How are you doing today? You're always like number one. Hold that title. Don't let anyone beat you. I am doing all right. I kind of feel a little under the weather today. I think the flu's going around. I don't know. Hey, Lena. But I think this project's gonna be fun. I want to do something different. Like slightly different. I want to do something more complex than what we're having here, but just been a busy week. How are you doing? Cool. I like that. Getting involved is cool. Are you talking about in class or what's up, Audrey? Life doesn't stop. That's the one thing. We can have all sorts of stuff going on, and life can still kick us right in the butt. But it's about resilience, right? It's about how you pick yourself back up. Um, and then appreciating the good days. To me, a good day is when like nothing bad or odd or stressful really happens. So that's great for me. Um, I am diagnosed with I have ADHD, and so sometimes that can cause extra stress with stuff, and so days when I'm not getting stressed out are nice days. Those are what I call good days. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you show up in the live streams, which is great, right? Audrey, Lena, how are you guys doing? Do you guys like my new mug? It's like a little cat. Wrong way. Like that. And then look, he's got a little pumpkin. It's like $5 at Target. So I just shoved it in the cart and my wife was like, "What is that?" And I was like, I am buying it. All right. I guess I shall be talking in class. You guys just chat in the and like keep on chatting and I can keep up with it. So a long day. It must have been long for everyone across the board. Um I agree with that sentiment. It felt a little long today. But This will be more of like a relaxed day in class because we're going to be focusing on illustrating for animation, which is a really big thing because a lot of the time we will have illustrations from like other artists, like graphic designers or just illustrators or whatnot. And um, files aren't necessarily prepped for animation. And so it's up to us to know how to separate things out and kind of prep an illustration to be brought into After Effects or into a different animation program and um, having it ready to go, right? And so what we are going to do today is we're actually going to work on illustrating a scene and didn't mean to hit my mic. And at the same time, we're going to have in the back of our mind what's going to animate, how things are going to animate, and then how we're going to want to separate those layers out so that we don't have to do any separating inside of After Effects. It's going to save us time in the long run. And so some of the times as like animators or motion graphic artists, we end up having to illustrate a lot of our own work. If there's not an illustrator on deck or a graphic designer on deck. And so having illustration skills is important. And so we're gonna be touching not only on that, but we're gonna be illustrating inside of a vector-based program. And so a vector-based program is different from raster-based, and I touched on this, I believe in the beginning of the semester. But raster-based programs are like Photoshop, Procreate, kind of things that have really texturized brushes. Usually programs that are super textured brushes and stuff like that are raster based illustration programs or softwares. And raster based is based off of pixels, right? So um when you're creating an image for illustration and it is going to be a raster based illustration, you have to take into account how big you're going to be scaling those illustrations. Um, because when you scale an image, for instance, let's just Google something landscape image. Let's save this on the desktop perfectly fine. Let me open it up. Now we have an image here. And this image is raster based, right? It's built out of pixels and not out of vector, which is a mathematical equation, right? That builds the image. And so because this is made in pixels, the more and more and the further in that I zoom on this image, it's going to be less sharp. It's going to become pixelated, grainy looking, and it doesn't look good, right? And so when you're illustrating for animation inside of a raster based program, you almost have to illustrate twice as large as what you're going to animate it at, right? So if you're going to be um, illustrating, if you're going to have an animation and the output is going to be 1920 by 1080, right? You're going to want to double that for a vector-based illustration. So at least I would double it. I would do 3840 by 1080 times 2, which is what, 2160. Let me just, yeah. So my image would be twice as large as what I'm going to actually animate it at. Because if I need to scale an object or make an object bigger inside of my scene, or possibly do what's called 2.5D and push different layers back into Z space inside of After Effects, the larger the image is, the easier it's going to work with, the less pixelated it's going to get, and the sharper it's going to stay. And so that's really important when you are creating illustrations inside of programs like Photoshop or Procreate, right? But the thing is when you're doing those illustrations, you also have to keep in mind that these are going to be larger in file size. And so sometimes our computer has a hard time handling layers that are done in raster based programs. And so it takes a long time for those animations when we're working inside of After Effects to preview, render, and stuff like that. And that's all fine, right? But we just have to account for that time that it's going to take, and the adjustments that will take when animating with a pixel based image. And so if you guys want to create, if you guys are more comfortable creating your images in programs like Photoshop or Procreate, I'm okay with that. And the cool thing about those is you get, like, there's obviously stylization that comes with that. And so you can get cool textures and whatnot. But just keep those things in mind when going to illustrate your image for this project. Now, vector based is all the illustrations are based off of mathematics. And so, like I mentioned in the beginning of class, if you create something inside of Adobe Illustrator, I think there's Vectornator on like iPads. There's a couple different apps you can use for vector work. And if you're creating, let's say I created a small image the size of a business card, right? Or driver's license or something. And I create that in a vector program. The nice thing about it is I can scale that image to any size I want. And because it's based off of mathematics, it will be sharp the entire time. And so I could have something that I illustrate as small as a card and then expand that to the size of a billboard, and it would still be sharp. And it also, it doesn't cause as much work for it's not as intense on your computer peripherals versus using those raster based program. Now the downfall to this, right, is you lose the ability to really add things like textures, uh gradients. They've gotten better, these programs have gotten better at adding those things in, and there's ways around this inside of both Illustrator and After Effects. But you just can't get that high level of detail for images that you would with one of these raster based programs. Even Adobe Animate is a vector based program, so it draws everything in vector form. And you can get detailed on it. It just takes a lot longer. It might not be as easy as it would be inside of a program like Photoshop or Procreate. Now, the cool thing is that we can always illustrate something inside of Illustrator, bring it into a raster based program, and then add layers on top that will add like texture and stuff like that. But that's just adding more layers when you bring it into a program like After Effects. And so, there's give and takes for each technique that you guys want to use here. I am going to be using Adobe Illustrator today. I'm very comfortable inside of Adobe Illustrator. Plus, I don't have the ability right now to hook up my iPad to my computer for you guys to see, so I can't use Procreate. I would love to use Procreate, but for this, I'm just a lot faster inside of Adobe Illustrator because it's what I learned initially. And so that's what we're going to be working in today. We're going to start from starting a new file, and then we're going to build out our scene. And hopefully we get this scene completed by the end of class. But if not, that's okay. I'm going to send you guys off. I'm going to allow you guys to have creative freedom on this project. And you're going to be able to kind of create something that looks totally different than mine, but maybe functions in the same way. And just knowing that even if you guys want to use a different program, the concepts are going to be the same as far as separating out your layers. Lena asked, would I say illustrating with a raster-based program is better than vector-based? When would you use vector-based program? I use vector-based all the time for my animations just because it lends itself to the style for infographics. Um, just the way it illustrates, it's easier to build shapes and stuff inside of Adobe Illustrator because the program is meant just for illustrating. Um, and that's just in general vector-based programs. Neither one is better than the other. It's just whatever the outcome is that you're looking for, right? And whether you're willing to give and take time for more detail, or if you're want something to kind of be just quick and you're going to sacrifice the detail in order to save on time, right? And so, and it, it always matters too what a client would have for input. So a client might say they want something in a certain style, and you're going to look at that and be like, okay, it's easier to illustrate in vector programs, like that kind of style. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys to which one you want to work in, but I highly recommend that if you're going to work in a raster-based program, you double the size of your illustration, or at least 1.5, 1.5 times the size of what, I'm sorry, not your illustration, but the 1920 by 1080 aspect ratio. So you'll want to make your image bigger than the render that you're going to have. And that way you can just scale it down inside of After Effects and scale it up whenever you need. And so here's I'm sure you guys have already kind of looked inside of the assignment here. If you guys are going to follow along with, and I sent this announcement out, I'm just going to say it again, but if you guys are going to follow along with the module, there's multiple ways of doing this. This one's the white and blue robot arm that I did. Here's a gray robot arm that you could do. They're just different styles and kind of slightly different techniques on how to draw each one. Here's Dr. Farina illustrating an orange robot arm, and here's the video of that. And then obviously your deliverables are here. Single MP4, 1920 by 1080, 24 frames a second. That's not going to be different from what I'm going to do in class today. You're going to still render it out as that. And then I want you guys to, you're going to comment on 4 other students' robot arms inside of Slack and submit yours. You're going to submit your animation onto Slack, and then 4 other students comment on those, and then just put an image inside of Slack when you're going to submit it for grading. Now, the biggest thing that we're going to be talking about, I mean, I know today we're going to be focusing on illustration for animation, but this whole class is going to, or this whole project, let me rephrase that, is going to be based on hierarchies. And hierarchies are essentially like rigging. I think they can be interchangeably used, those words. But it is essentially connecting different layers to each other in specific spots so that when you move one, the other follows. I know that we talked a little bit about parent-child relationships, and that's what we're really going to learn through this project here. And we're not going to get to that until next week's class. I think this is going to take at least 3 classes to do. So that is why I have it due on the due date range is the 16th through the 23rd, and that's liable to change based on if we get this project done early or if it's done later. So if it takes 4 classes, I'll adjust this timeline, and if it takes only 3 classes, then I'll leave this the same. And if it only takes today and on Tuesday, then I will update this as well. I'll move the timeline. But you have the option to either do what I do in class for the project currently in this semester, or you can go back and do any of these other ones. If you do the other ones, they're worth 100 points. If you decide to follow along and do kind of an assembly line type animation like we're going to do today, then you have the opportunity to get 100 points extra credit, right? But here's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be parenting, right? Which is hierarchies, same thing. Rigging, parenting, um, using hierarchies, all the same. Anchor points are placed in the appropriate location on each moving part. All of the moving parts are linked to each other in the proper order, and you guys will understand that later. Talking about the animation, this is going to be updated based on what we're doing currently in class. I'll have to update that either today or tomorrow with an additional option for what we're going to have, you know, based on whatever your robot arms are going to do. Color and design, consistent color palette. I'll talk about where you can pick up color palettes and stuff online. Title. This is going to be, I don't know if we're going to have a title on the one that we're doing today. I might just remove this part. But if you guys if you guys do follow along with the module and create this animation, then I'd like to see the robot arm text in the background. And if not, if you're following along with the one right now, the 5 points will be automatically given to you for the title because you're doing extra work anyways. You're going to be doing more animation and stuff. 1920, 1080, 24 frames a second, MP4, like everything else. Do we have any questions right now? Open this up. The first thing that I'm going to start doing, I already have some inspirational, like illustrations that I was looking at online and that I found already that I like and that I think will be good for this class. Now, when you guys are looking for, you know, inspiration or just kind of ideas on what you're going to illustrate, I always go to, you know, Pinterest or just Google, and I start Googling certain terms to bring up images that I can pull ideas from, right? And so instead of this, and this, it applies to this as well if you guys are going to follow this module, but the first thing I started to do, right, is to look for that inspiration. And so I started Googling robotic arm illustrations. And this is just kind of what I did in the class for this GIF right here, this animation. And I go to images and I just kind of start perusing around for something that I feel would be achievable based on like what my ideas are going to be for the animation. And so in this case, you know, the whole thing was the arm's going to move down, it's going to pick up a ball, and then it's going to throw that ball, right? And so I wanted to make sure there were some joints on this arm and just a little bit of, you know, some detail with the cogs here, and we have the decals kind of on the side, right? And we're going to be doing a very similar thing for the assembly line illustration that we're going to do today. And so I want you guys to, you know, go online and get an idea for some robotic arms that you guys want to illustrate in your animate or for this animation, because that's going to be kind of like the main thing. Nakara asks, so there's 2 assignments, but one is extra credit. No, one singular assignment, but you can choose between 2 options, right? So you can do either what we're doing in class right now, which is going to be similar to this, but it's going to be an assembly line animation, or which requires more, there's going to be more illustration to it, there's going to be more animations to it, so it's going to take more time. And so if you do the one that, if you follow along in this semester's class and do what I'm doing in the live stream currently, then I give 100 points extra credit because it's going to be just more involved in more detail. If you don't care about the extra credit and you're okay, you just kind of want to get the project done, I'll allow you guys to follow along with the videos inside of the module, and you can complete it for 100 points like normal. So you can choose, do you want to do the more work for an extra credit of 100 points, or do you want to do the standard amount of work for the normal 100 points? So you don't have to do both of them, just got to pick one, whichever one you want to do. Does that make sense? Cool, sweet, awesome. And so with the if you guys want to follow along with this one, you know, just kind of pick a robot arm out and you're going to illustrate it. You can see, like I said, there's 4 different kinds that we illustrate in here, or 3 different ones that you guys can follow along with. And when you're wanting to do if you want to do the assembly line one, we're going to do similar, right? And so I kind of grabbed some inspirational ideas online, and you can pick when you're looking, you know, the things I look for is this an achievable way to animate? You guys are not going to want to pick illustrations to model your images after that are in isometric views like this, right? Because this is going to be harder to animate, because this is not just, it is a flat 2D object, right? But it's not going to move in 2D space. It would move in 3D space, and we want to avoid that. And so I would look for illustrations to model yours off of, like these, right? So I could do something similar to this. I would save the image as, I would go into my folder that I have prepped, right? I have one that I created called Hierarchies, and I would go inside of assets and images and save it in there as a, you know, as an image to look at and gather ideas from, right? And so you guys can have inspirational images that you work from. You know, I would highly tell you guys not to plagiarize work, though. You know, just don't plagiarize work and just steal off of someone else's idea. Like this one, I'm pretty sure I used as an idea for this arm. I mean, there's only so many things online that you can go through and look at, but you know, you can get color combination ideas from these. Illustration style. Do you want it to have a stroke? Do you not want it to have a stroke? Do you want it to be line art like this, where it's just lines and no fill? Or do you want it to be kind of just this flat vector looking illustrations, kind of like this, right? And so robotic arm illustrations is what I searched for inspiration for this project. But right now, if I were you guys, I would do assembly line illustrations, product assembly line illustration. That's okay. Just kind of getting ideas. In fact, this is one of the ideas that I have that we're going to kind of model ours off of. And but I'm not going to do the line. I think I'm going to color mine in a little bit more. You know, I'm going to make sure, the one thing that I will show you guys on here, right? And the one thing that you want to make sure you have, because this is going to be about hierarchies and rigging, right? Is you do not want flat robotic arms like this if you're going to be doing the assembly line animation. You are going to want it to look more like this, right? And so we can do that. We would just essentially flip this upside down, and so it would look like it was hanging off the wall. So you would illustrate something similar to this, but it would just be hanging from the wall instead of being on the ground, right? Let me see if I can see something similar, kind of like this. Yeah, similar to this right here, where it's like hanging from, like, we'll do something like this. This is kind of neat, where it's hanging from some kind of beam up here, and there's an arm that can go down and it can grab an object off the assembly line, you know, yada yada yada. this one is okay if you have maybe one of them, but I have to see one like this. This is the most important one that I want to see. It could even be off of like a floor one, right? So it could be on the floor, like this. I just want to be able to see what it's doing, right? You know, that's what the point of what we're going to do here. So, gather some inspiration, and right now over classes, the time for you guys to do illustrations over the weekend. And if you guys are questioning, you have questions about illustrations you want to ask me, you can always ask me, or post it in Slack and see what other students think about the illustration if you want to. Like this one, this is a great one to look at for inspiration as well, because these are on the ground. And they're not necessarily in the way of what would be happening. You could even place it behind here, which is kind of neat. Maybe we'll do that with one of them. But yeah, that is what we're going to be doing. And so I have some illustrations, essentially the ones you guys saw, this one, and the other one that wasn't colored, something similar to this. I think we're going to do like this whole iPad looking thing where it's assembling an iPad, packaging it up, and shipping it. Just maybe in like a different style, similar looking stuff. Now, keep in mind, the more detail that you put into your illustration is going to mean the more animating you're going to have to do, right? When I look at this illustration, I start to think, what are the things that I would have moving in this image? Lena asked a question real quick. Let me answer that. For the assembly animation, can we follow your tutorial, or would you like to make something different so it's not like super close, right? You can follow very similarly, but I'd like to see something um a little more creative on your guys' end. I want you guys to have creative freedom with this. Having different color palettes, having it look slightly differently. Maybe it's doing something slightly different instead of just assembling one thing. Maybe it's I had seen one that was like a food assembly line, right? So maybe it's assembling some kind of food. But just keep in mind what I'm going to say next is about um looking at an image and seeing where it would animate, right? So if you're illustrating something, you're like, oh, I want to do this, I need you guys to be conscious of the skills that you currently have. And if you guys have something that you're like, hey, maybe want to learn how to do that, you can ask me if I can throw that into the animation, or just kind of teach you guys how to do that. But if it seems like it's way beyond your scope of knowledge, what you guys know, then it might be a good idea to wait until you guys learn a little bit more in class. But with that being said, I want you guys to be able to explore your own creativity and um have fun with this one, right? If it's close to mine, I'm not going to dock you, but I don't want it to be exactly the same. Now, with this, right? Let's say, because this is one of the illustrations that I've been looking at that I'm going to use for, come on, zoom in here, that I'm going to use for inspiration on my illustration, right? And so when I see this, I think, oh, maybe these arms move side to side, right? Maybe they go from left to right. They're obviously going to be able to extend down, right? So I'm like thinking about all of these things that could be happening. With this, obviously, I said I don't want to see, like, you can have one arm that extends down. Like, notice this one goes down to pick up a box. Maybe we'll do something similar to that, right? But like this one's suctioning up some kind of thing and going to push it down onto the iPad or whatever tablet this is. And then this one's over here. So maybe this moves as well. Obviously, this is going to probably move. These iPads or the little tablets are going to move down the assembly line that way, right? These can move. These little things might spin if I have like some kind of texture. I'm thinking on the conveyor belt. The box would move as well, because like it's going into here, it's getting boxed and then it's coming out. This would move, this would be dropping it into here. You'd probably want to have these little buttons moving, maybe something happening on screen here. So you're starting to understand that the more detail that you have in your illustration, the more opportunities there are to animate these things. And so maybe when we have this animation done, right, and I'm reviewing them, I might notice that and say, hey, why don't we find a way to illustrate or animate this thing, right? So let's kind of build off of this concept of where's that one? Right here, right? Like a tablet or something is going to be done to the object, and then maybe one thing instead of doing two, like or three, right? Because there's 1, 2, 3 arms here doing something. Maybe we just focus on one. So maybe we'll do this one, right? So some kind of object comes by. We're shooting some kind of, like, we're welding something on it. It goes into something, it comes out boxed, and then we're going to package the box, right? Get the box ready for shipping. And so let's just kind of get into that. Maybe I'm trying to think. Do you guys want to see me do like a tech kind of one like this, or like some kind of food thing? You guys can let me know in the chat, and I'll pick the favored one, and then we'll kind of go from there. I've got my project. I obviously duplicated this, created the project file here. It is ready to go. The tech one looks cool. Okay, Lena, 1 vote for the tech. Anyone who's in the chat, leave me, even if you don't want to talk a lot, just leave me a vote in the chat. The first thing I'm obviously going to do is open Adobe Illustrator. Let's get that started. All right. And I'm going to go up here in the upper left-hand corner. It says new file. I'm just going to select that. And because I'm working in vector, I can go ahead and do one under film. Obviously, I do this one a lot, so that's why it's here. The film one's automatically 1920 by 1080 in size, right? So I don't have to change anything about my artboard. And it doesn't have a background, but it has like that title action sequence in the center so you can see it. Now, if you want to get this and you don't see it here in your recent items, all you have to do is move up to Film and Video tab up here, and you can select it under HDV, HDTV 1080, right? It's this one right here, the second one. You'll want to avoid, we're not going to be doing anything for print, so I would just avoid that unless you plan to print it out later. But Nakara says tech sounds good. That's cool. Awesome. Art and illustration. You know, these are just presets that you can use, but these are in points, and we are working in pixels, and so that's why it's important to use these film and video presets, especially if you're just going to be animating. And so I'm going to hit create here. And then once this pulls up, the first thing I'm going to do is save my file. Now notice if I zoom out here, Control plus or minus button, same as in After Effects, it allows you to zoom in and out of your illustration. But when you look here, I have I have that title action sequence, right? And so I've got the little crosshair in the center, which shows the center of my composition. And then just these little boxes that remind us of the aspect ratio of a television. But I'm going to go up to File, Save As. You can also hit Shift Control S here. And I'm going to save this illustration under that file that I created, GCC, hierarchies, assets, vector. And I'm going to name this assembly line. And I'm going to save that. This will pop up and I always just hit OK. It allows it to be a PDF compatible file, different profiles, compressed, you know. It's okay. Just hit OK. You'll be fine. And then if I hold down my space bar, it brings up this little hand icon in the center and it allows me to click and drag my my canvas around, right? And then zooming is control plus or minus again. And over here, let me see let's go to the standard layout. The layouts, your workspace should actually show up like this. Essentials here. Essentials Classic is something else you might see, which is fine. This just gives you different panels, right? Panels are the same. Let me move my thing right there. I'm going to move myself down this way. All right. But you have your panels over here on the right side, and they close down to compress to make room for you so you can have room for your illustration. But if you click on these little icons here, it will bring up the options. So here you're going to have like color swatches, different brushes, which we won't worry about that because we're just going to be using shape layers and stuff. Your stroke options, gradient options, your transparency, your layers. This is an important one right here. Your layers tab. We're going to be in that one a lot. The properties one is nice because you can edit your artboards, use rulers, whatnot here. But as I go, I'm going to be showing you guys how to activate some of these tools using shortcuts on your computer. And so the first thing I want to do is let's look for a color palette that we can kind of use with our illustration. And so I'm going to go back to Google and I'm going to go to, let's go to coolors.com, COOLORS.com or .co. I'm so sorry. .co. Different than .com, right? And this is a free palette generator. Obviously, there's a pro version, which allows you to do like saving them and using larger palettes and stuff. But we're going to kind of keep it very simple on the color palette option so that we're not overwhelmed by color, right? A simplistic color palette sometimes shows a stronger imagery than something that's really complex. And unless you're very seasoned in illustration, which a lot of you guys are, then I would just kind of plan on keeping this one simple. Plus, remember, the more simplistic the look, the easier it is to animate. So if you start adding shadows and stuff onto illustrations, if you do it in raster, like in Photoshop or Procreate, you might have to animate those things. You know, so I would avoid adding shadows if you're going to do stuff like that. We can do that later inside of After Effects. And so I'm just going to, let's explore some trending palettes here. You can just click the generator to start one. But let's look something. That one's not bad. That's very like corporate looking color palette to me. Notice there's different ones here. But as you're looking, you can see that it gives you the hex code, right? And the hex code we can enter into any of our Adobe programs and it will automatically have that color, right? The hex code works through any program that is using the same color profiles. And usually these, you know, if it has the ability to use a hex code, it's going to work just fine in any of your programs, even in Procreate. I actually might stick with this color palette here. This one's kind of nice. I like the red. I like the blue for the background. Some options. I'm going to save this. So I'm just going to click that 3 little dots there and I'm going to export the palette. And I want to export this as you can export it as an SVG, which is a vector file, and then you can just bring it into your Illustrator file and it will be there. You can click it, move things around. Also the ASE is a color palette option. It's like an Adobe swatch essentially, which you can import into your Adobe programs like Illustrator, After Effects, even Photoshop. But I am going to likely just save it as an SVG. You can also just do an image and drag the image into your Illustrator file and then just use the color picker to grab from it. But I'm gonna, let's see here. I'm gonna save it as an SVG. And it automatically is gonna add it to my downloads folder. So I'm going to move that to my desktop and then into my appropriate folder. I'm going to go into Hierarchies, move this into Assets, and under Vector. Then I'm going to open that and notice it brings them all in like this, which I can click on, and the color shows up inside of my color picker options right over here. If not, we do have a little eyedropper tool, which you can click and go over here and just click on the objects and it will select the color for you. Now notice when I'm doing that, because I'm selected on this object, it is changing that object color, and that's not what I want to do. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Let's say I'm not selected on any objects and I want to pick that color. I'll just grab that color picker and then click on here and notice that it changes it over here in the corner. So these are your active colors. This is your active fill color right here. And then the one behind it with the slash through it is your active stroke color. Now, because it's white with a slash through it, just means that I don't have a stroke selected for my objects. And that's okay. I don't think I'm going to use a stroke on this. So that's not a problem. But because this is a vector, I'm just going to select all these, hit Control C, and I'm going to paste it onto its own separate layer here inside of my document that I have for my assembly line. And that way I will always have this. And I want to select layer 1, and I'm just going to hit Control V, and I'm going to bring this up to the top here so that I have it. I'm going to hit Control G on my keyboard, and that allows me to group these objects together. So if I go to grab them, they're all going to move as one, which limits me then, right? Because now I can't select each one individually. I can always undo the grouping if I right click and select ungroup here. But I want to keep these all together so they don't spread apart, and I'll just use my color picker to choose which color I want to use. And so I'm going to change the name of this layer to Color Palette. And I'm going to lock this layer so that I don't accidentally move it around, right? Because I'm just going to use that color picker, so it's not that big of a deal. You can also put this on the side if you'd like to. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create a background layer for my image. This is optional. You can always do this inside of After Effects if you want to as well. But I'm just going to grab my shape tool over here. On this toolbar to the left, you have all of your illustration tools, right? Here's your selection tool. This is a direct selection tool, which allows you to select vertexes separately and move them around differently, which we'll probably do at some point. Your pen tool, if you want to create a more organic shape. You're going to use these ones very often. This here's my shape builder tool. You have a brush, which we won't use this brush actually. Let's see. We have a shape builder tool, which we're going to use for sure. This thing is fantastic. Actually, that's not the one. This is the one. Whoop. Cancel. This one right here is the shape builder tool, which really kind of eliminated the Pathfinder panel, which this is much easier to use because it's visually, essentially you're melding like shapes together, which is really nice. Color picker, obviously the hand tool if you want to select that, but all you have to do is hit H on the keyboard and it will select that. If you want to activate your selection tool, you just hit V on your keyboard. V as in Victor. Now notice when I hover over these tools, it tells me not only what it is, but it tells me the shortcut if there is one. And I can always learn more as well. So I can click learn more and it'll take me through a tutorial. So if you have questions about what an object is, you can, or what a, I'm sorry, what a tool is inside of Illustrator, you can always hover over it and learn from the Adobe website. Now, when there's these tiny little triangles next to these tools, it means that there's nested tools inside of there that we can access as well. So for instance, with the shape tool right here, when I click and hold down and then let go, there's like a long click. When you do a long click on these, there's different shapes I can start with. So if I want to do like a rounded rectangle where my edges are curved, I can grab that. I have an ellipse tool, polygon tool, star tool, etc. And so let's go ahead and we're going to start our background here. I have this little, oh, it doesn't do that with the mouse. So if you guys can kind of see on my canvas, there's a little pencil with a circle and a slash through it. That's because my only layer that's active on here is locked. And so in order to create a new layer, you have to come over here. There's a little box with a plus sign in it, and it says create new layer. And you're going to go ahead and select that. And I'm going to rename this layer right away. Now, naming your layers is essential when you're illustrating for animation, because we're going to bring this Illustrator file into After Effects. And when we do that, it syncs up the layer information that we have already created inside of Illustrator. And so my layer that says background, anything that's on that layer will import into After Effects with the layer name background. So keeping things separate that are going to move, they need to be on their own layer. Those objects need to be on their own layer. And so the background, I always like to keep that on its own layer because sometimes I decide to change background. But I'm going to select this rectangle tool and I'm going to click once, and it comes up with a box that allows me to manually put in a size. And because I know the size of my canvas, which is 1920 by 1080, I'm just going to type that in, and it's going to create a box that is the size of my canvas that I need. Now I'm going to hit V on my keyboard, and this canvas is obviously off of my art, or this object is not in alignment with my artboard here. And so at the top of the program, we have another toolbar which gives us different options here. You have your kind of transform options, where this object is located in space on your canvas, where the anchor point of that object is. So you can click here to change the anchor points. You also have an alignment option. So we can align, our objects to the, I'm so sorry, you guys. We can align the objects to certain things, right? So if I had this and this selected and I hit the alignment tool, it's going to align those to each other. But if I'm not selected on any other object and I hit the alignment tool, center align vertically and horizontally, it's going to align that up perfectly to my artboard, right? So we don't want things hanging off of the artboard. You're going to notice that the edge of my canvas, the edge of my video, is this black line right here. So if things are hanging off, they're not going to show up on your composition correctly when you bring this into After Effects. And so I just want to make sure that that's fully centered. And then I'm going to choose a color for my background, which on my color palette, I'm going to use this color right here. Maybe that one's all right. I think I'm going to use this one, but maybe let's start with the dark blue and then we'll move on from there. Like I said, I might change my background as I go. Control S is going to save your file as you're moving along as well. And so I suggest you just do that so you guys don't lose work, right? And I'm going to create a new layer. And I've got my illustrations off to the side here as my inspiration, right? So I'm going to first create the conveyor belt itself. And I'm going to grab the rounded rectangle tool. And I'm going to change my color here. If I double click on this, it allows me to pull up the color selector, right? And I'm going to pick some kind of gray from that blue color we had before. Maybe shift the hue a little bit here so it's slightly different. And the nice thing about this, right, is that I can always go through and change my color palette later and easily change options on, or easily change the colors that are coordinated the same. How do I word this? Okay, let me kind of restart this phrase. So inside of Adobe Illustrator, there's an option to select all objects with the same fill color or the same stroke or both, right? The same fill and stroke, which is nice because if I decide maybe later I want to change this color palette, I'm not happy with this, I can select a different color palette, bring it in here, select the same appearance, right? Or same fill colors, same blend mode, same stroke, different things like that. And it will select, you know, depending on which object I have selected, it'll select objects that are that similar color. And then I can just go to the color picker and change the color super easy, which is something that's awesome inside of Illustrator. But let's go ahead and create like this conveyor belt look. And so I'm gonna just kind of create like a long rectangle. And these, when you create a shape that has like squared edges inside of Illustrator, these little dots show up. And if you hit V and or just grab these dots, it will allow you to change the roundness of the edges of that object. And so I'm going to drag that all the way in so it's fully rounded on all sides. And I'm just going to kind of select this and move it down a little bit because I obviously don't want it up very high. And I want to rename this to Conveyor Belt because I know that this is going to rotate, right? And so I want to make sure that this is on its own layer because I'm going to have this part section actually animating. And the next thing I want to do is add some of, I'm also thinking ahead. Let me kind of backtrack for a second. I'm thinking ahead about what kind of things I might want to do inside of After Effects, right? That might not lend itself to create inside of Adobe Illustrator. And I'll kind of explain that more once we get into After Effects. And so I might have this look kind of simplistic in the beginning. And then when I move it into After Effects, it will look more detailed when I can add some other stuff in the program, right? Because it'll just be easier to do it on a shape layer inside of After Effects. But I want to create some kind of like gear that's going to turn here, that's going to rotate, make it appear like this is rotating. In fact, I kind of want a stroke around this conveyor belt so that it looks kind of like a separated area. And so I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to select the stroke color option and it brings it into the front. And I'm just going to select a solid color here. And I'm going to change this, double click on it and bring this down and make it kind of a darker color. And now obviously the stroke is really thin. If I click off of it, you can barely see it in there. And so I want to make that thicker. There's a couple different ways you can do that. Up here at the top, you can change the stroke right there. Or what you can do is on the side, there's an actual panel that allows you to change the stroke, and it's got more options in here for you. If I click this little hamburger menu, that's what those little menus are called. If I zoom here and you click this little hamburger menu, you can click show options and it'll give you more options along with the stroke. So instead of like a squared off cap to the stroke, I can have a nice rounded cap. which is nice for certain illustrations, right? And we'll do that maybe a little bit later. You can add arrowheads to this. You can add dashed lines. But right now I just kind of want to increase the stroke size. So I'm just going to, first of all, you have to have your image selected. And then I'm going to increase this until I think it looks nice and thick, which is perfect right there for me. And I'm going to create a new layer here because the conveyor belt's going to move on its own. I'm going to lock this layer because I don't want to accidentally move it. And on here, I'm going to change the name to conveyor. I'm just going to use CONV for short. Belt gears. And I'm just going to leave that open. But I'm going to go up here and I'm going to hold click and select the ellipse tool. And I want this to not have a stroke. So I'm going to shut that stroke off by this little option right here. We'll select none. This is a gradient. You can have a gradient stroke, a gradient fill, but I'm not going to do that. And then this is just like a solid color right there. I'm going to select the no stroke because I don't want that. And then I'm going to click back onto this fill color and double click here so I can change it. Yes, correct. So Lena asked the question, anything we plan to animate has to be in a new layer. That is correct. It has to be on its own layer because when we bring this file into After Effects, it keeps all of your layer data. So if you have it all separated appropriately inside of Illustrator, it will import into After Effects with those files all those layers all separated out for you, and you don't have to do a bunch of different work. Now, if I were to create all of this on one single layer, it makes more work for me later on because when I bring that into After Effects, I have to separate everything out at that point, and that's just a lot more work. You'll usually have to do that when you're working with files from graphic designers or illustrators who don't know how to prep a file for animation. And that happens. Not everyone, who's in the art industry knows how to, sorry guys, knows how to prep files for animation, right? We didn't know that until today. You guys didn't know that until today. And so Lena is correct. Anything that you plan to animate, put it on its own separate file. And then just good housekeeping is making sure you name those layers right away. And so I'm going to actually select the same, I'm going to select the same color of the stroke for the cogs. Now, when I hit the eyedropper tool, which is the letter I, by the way, and I'm going to grab my selection tool here, which is V for Victor. Whenever you use your eyedropper tool on an object, it will adopt not only that fill color, but any kind of stroke color as well. And so what I want to do is I want to hit this little kind of corner looking arrows, and what it's going to do is swap the fill and the stroke color. You can also hit Shift X and it will do that for you. And so right now I don't want to have a stroke, but I want the fill color to be the same color as what the stroke is around the belt. And so I'm just going to go here and I'm going to shut that stroke off, but now I have the fill color that's the same color as the stroke. That makes sense. A lot of words there, I know. Oh, my mouth is dry today. And let's go ahead and select our ellipse tool. We should be on the conveyor belt gears there. And the first thing I'm going to make this start off kind of big on this so that I can make it smaller as needed. And holding down Shift, I'm going to click and drag to make a perfect circle here. And I want to add, like around a gear, right, are these little cogs that essentially like clip into another cog and it helps to rotate everything around. Well, I'm going to go up here and select my rounded rectangle tool. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw kind of this little square or little rectangle. You don't have to hold down Shift if you don't want to. When you hold down Shift, it's going to proportionally scale the object. So you'll get a perfect circle, you'll get a perfect square. I am going to make it kind of more rectangle shaped. And I'm going to hit V on my keyboard, and I'm going to actually drag and select both of these objects. And up here on my alignment panel, if I hover over here, it says align to selection. I can always like change it if I want to, but I want the objects to align to each other. And so I'm just going to hit horizontal align. And what that's going to do is it's going to line up my anchor points from this object that I created and this one that I created. And now I'm going to maybe nudge this up a little bit by selecting it and then just hitting the arrow key up on my keyboard so that it kind of brings that up a little bit more. Looks like it sticks out a little bit more there. And now I want to duplicate this around the actual object. And I could always just, hit, if you hold down Alt, you'll get this little double arrow when you hover over an object. And if you click and drag, it will just duplicate that object for you. But I want it so that it's like perfectly distributed around the circular object here. And so I am going to go into, I think it's under, I might have to find this one, but we want to, oh wait, is it under here now? No, that's not it. If I go to my window, let me see. There's an option somewhere in here that allows you to, hold on, let me see real quick. Mirror, it allows you to like mirror it. Usually it looks like a butterfly. Maybe it's inside. There's that. Where is it? Maybe it's not in the desktop one. Maybe it is on pattern, repeat. Yes, under repeat. So object up at the top here, and then you go down to repeat, and we're going to do a radial repetition. And now notice that I've got my object here, and it's always going to repeat whatever object that you have selected. And now I want to expand the size of the circle out. I'm going to just hold down shift and drag this little, there's like a little circle here, which you can select, this little white circle. And when you click and you drag it, it allows you to kind of scale, and it obviously distributes these objects evenly amongst the circle, right? And if I wanted to change the distance in between some of these, or the amount of repetitions there are, I can change this. There's like a little, let me undo that. There's like a little half circle down here that is separated and has a little arrow inside of it. And of course it won't do that when I zoom in. Let me see if it will when I zoom in like this. Perfect. There's like this tiny little half circle here with tiny little arrows. And if I grab that and start moving that around that circle, clicking and dragging, it's going to remove some of those repetitions. And if I click and drag this one, it's going to increase the distance in between those repetitions, right? And then if I click this one, it's also going to decrease how many instances you have of that object. And so I think 8 is okay. Let me expand this out a little bit so that it fits more kind of in the center of the object. Let's see if this is going to work, because let me just select these both and see if it will center it. Nice. And it does that for me. And so now I have like this kind of hog shaped item. Now, the only thing is, now when I select this, I have control of all of these separate items in here. But if I want to change some of these, I can't select these instances individually because they're all linked to this one here. And I have the view that I want, right? I have 8 just different instances around it. They're separated pretty well as far as distance around each other. But I want to create this as all one singular shape. And right now I can't do that because these are all different instances of this first rectangle. And so what I want to go up and do here is I'm going to go under object, and under shape, I am going to convert to a shape. I believe that works. No, not that one. Object, maybe expand. Object and fill. Okay. Nice. Okay, that is what you have to do. So, let's go through that again. I'm going to undo that. So we have our instances. This is set up perfectly for me that I like the way it looks. I like the distance. I like the shape of the cog all together right now. And so I'm going to select that one rectangle object, the first cog here, and it's going to select all those other instances. And then I'm going to go to object and expand. And when you hit expand, it's going to give you the option to not only you're expanding the the line, the parameters of the object. And so I want to do the object and the fill, which is fine. And I'm going to hit OK. And now this is essentially one singular shape versus one little shape with many instances. And I want to fuse all of these separate rectangles to this circle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to notice I could individually control these. They are automatically grouped together. So if I right click and hit ungroup, right, I can grab this and move it around. But I don't want to do that because they're perfectly distributed. And so let me just undo that so it's all grouped. And I'm going to select that circle behind. And I'm going to hit Shift and M together. M as in Mary. And what that's going to do is it is going to essentially turn this, it's going to give you this arrow with a little plus sign by it as your mouse. Your cursor is going to turn into that. And when you hover over these separate objects, wherever these objects are interacting with each other, it gives you kind of like this checkered kind of looking pattern. And what that means is you're hovering over that specific section, because anything that is intersecting with a line or a path on here can be turned into its own shape. So if I clicked on here and then I grab my selection tool, and now I've got this object. If I ungroup it, I've got this little separate object. Ungroup this again. Sorry, keeps them all grouped. But I've got this tiny little separate object that I can move around. So it essentially like spliced it at the path, right? And that's great, but I want to build one singular shape. And so I'm going to hit that Shift M again. That's this tool right over here. If you guys don't know the shortcut, you can just select that little tool here. And I am going to just click and drag, and you're going to see a line drawn. And, oh, let me undo that because I am not selected on all of the objects. You want to make sure that you click off and drag over everything that you want to be turned into one singular shape, because if you're not, then it's not going to include that path to essentially weld the shape together. What we're doing is the same thing that you see over here in the Pathfinder area. So I could just click this button right here and it will all become one singular shape. Much quicker for something like this. But for something maybe a little bit more complex and I didn't want certain parts of the shape included, like maybe I don't want this center shape included, right? So I can hit Shift M and I can drag my mouse, making sure I select everything that I want to weld together over different selections, different path options. I'm just going to drag it over here. Everything that's going to be welded together turns red. And I want this real quick and this real quick. And now when I let go, it's going to create one singular cog shape, but then it leaves this separate shape on its own. So I'm going to hit V. And now I can grab this and fully remove it. And I have kind of like this center option here on my cog, which actually kind of looks neat. So I think I'm going to keep it. I'm just going to delete this little shape there. But the cool thing is this is one singular shape and not a bunch of separate things, which is really nice because when I go to animate this, right, my anchor point's going to be in the center and I can animate the rotation of this object. And it will just, it'll be really nice. It's all even and it's not like lopsided. So when it's rotating, it's going to look like an actual nice rotation. And I can see that if I just hold down shift or if I just grab this little, because we're in the transform tool right now, or the selection tool. So when I grab the shape and I hover over the corner on the outside of the box and I just turn this, I can see that the shape is even on all sides, right? I'm just going to hit undo, undo. Lena asked, could I show which button I clicked for the quickest option of the welding shapes? Yeah. That is the Pathfinder option, which is under, where are you? Is it under appearance? No. Let's see. If I wanted to take, let's show you guys that again, using the polygon, right? We'll create a polygon here. I'm gonna, yeah, cool. This tiny little guy here. Can't see him real quick. You can see his path though. I'm gonna select them both. And when I select them both, two objects together, this little, under your properties panel, oh, come on, under your properties panel over here, which is, if you can't find that panel, you just go under window and then you, window, and then you go down here to properties, right? And it'll open that up for you. But there's a little section down here that's called Pathfinder, right? And I clicked this button right here, which welds them together. And each one does something different. So that one welds them together. It is called Unite. That's what the button is called. This one is click to subtract the front object. So if I click that right now, it's going to subtract that little center. This option right here is going to remove everything that is not intersecting together. So if I click this, it just gives me this because it removed all of the rest of the shape on the outside that wasn't intersecting with this, right? With this little shape that I have here. And then if I click this, it's going to exclude that little shape again. So there's a couple different ways to do the same thing inside of Illustrator. But I just wanted you guys to be able to see and decipher on your own which one you find the easiest to use. Like it took 1 second for me to click this button and create this shape. But I wanted to remove that center part. And so I could have also just clicked this button right here, which would have both united all of this stuff and excluded that little center. But this one right here, the shape builder tool, is a great way to kind of create like a custom option, right? So you can exclude like tiny little separate parts if you wanted to. You'll just kind of you'll understand more as like we go along and you guys are starting to illustrate things that are a little more complex. But this is a nice, going to be pretty simplistic illustration. And then the other thing maybe I want around here are little like screws on this, right? So I might just create an ellipse tool, or just grab an ellipse and holding down shift, do that. And then we're going to make that, I'm going to zoom out and make this a darker gray. Drop this color down. And I'm going to make it slightly smaller, holding down shift, just grabbing the edge there, probably even smaller than that. I might like it centered there. I'm going to grab both and just make sure they're aligned vertically to each other. And then I'm going to select this and also repeat it. So object, pattern, repeat, radial, and I'm going to increase the size here. Move that over. Maybe center these objects together. Vertical and horizontal. I am going to, actually, I don't want to increase the size of these because I want these to be smaller. So let me go back to this, and I'm going to click this little white button here and expand them. Probably about this far out, just kind of visually seeing about how much distance will be. I'm going to grab these both and I'm going to align them and see if I like that. Obviously it's not centered. I can see from the area here. I probably want to bring that in a little bit more. Just kind of make sure that it looks fairly centered in between each one of these cogs, which I think that looks pretty good. Slightly off because I can see the values. Notice when I'm turning this, I can not only see the radius distance amount, but I can also see the angle that it's at. And if I hold down shift, maybe control, alt, none of those work. Shift, no, that's close. That's at 90.5 degrees, and I don't think it will visually make a big difference. And then I'm going to go to object and expand those circles, hit OK, expanding the fill and stuff, and then I'm going to just select, because these are grouped together, right? But I want to group it with this. And so I'm just going to select both of these and just hit Control G to group it as one solid shape. So if I move this, those little screws move as well. And then I'm going to make this small. So the, like I said, vector is mathematically drawn. And so if I make this smaller, that's completely fine. Holding down shift, it will keep the same, it's going to keep the same sharpness, right? So I'm going to hit Control S because I just did all that work and I want to save that. And the cool thing is that I could actually select this if I wanted to and go to Object, Repeat, and I could repeat it in a line like this. But there's an option to do this inside of After Effects. And so I'm going to only create one cog because I know that I'm going to bring this inside of After Effects and repeat this later, right? And so I don't have to do as much work right now. And then I'm going to, let's create a new layer. And I'm going to lock this cog. And I'm just going to create, actually on the conveyor belt, I'm going to unlock that and I'm going to select this. And I'm going to add some feet to this. I'm going to create kind of like a, let's illustrate a line. So I'm going to grab that pen tool up at the top. Let's see if that did that correctly. Without having this conveyor belt selected, grabbing this pen tool up here, which is P for Peter, and I'm just going to kind of move along, and on that path I'm just going to click, and then I'm going to hold down shift and I'm going to move over and I'm going to click again, and then I'm going to hit V on my keyboard, which unselects that pen tool. It gets me out of that pen tool. And let's increase the size of this stroke. We want it to be a stroke, so right now it's actually in a fill mode, which I don't want. So when I bring this up here, it doesn't look like anything because I want it to be a stroke and not a fill. And so over here, I'm going to, again, either select that little arrow in the corner or hit Shift and X. And that is going to swap those out. And now all of a sudden this is a stroke and not a fill. And I'm just going to increase this probably to 15 will be fine. I'm going to create a round cap on it. And then I'm going to turn it black. So I'm going to go over here, double click and drag this down. Actually, let's just kind of do a darker version of that gray, but not fully black. There we go. And then I'm going to just holding down shift, bring that down here. Maybe make it a little bit thicker because I want it to kind of stand out from the conveyor belt itself. That looks good. 27. All right. And then I'm going to add just some legs onto this. So I'm going to also grab my stroke or my pen tool, sorry. And I'm going to actually, the pen tool should be fine because it's going to have the same properties as I just had prior. And I'm just going to create, holding down shift, some legs here. I'm going to hit V and let's repeat these. So object, repeat. I think it is actually, let's use the blend options. So in order to blend, blending is different than repeating. Repeating repeats an object around like in a certain pattern, right? So if I were to repeat this object, select it and go to the repeater like we did before, I could do it, I could mirror it so it flips around, but it like a wing of a moth or a butterfly or something like that. Um their wings are mirrored from each other, right? So you can mirror it, or you can put it in a grid, which like gives you like this great option, which we could always use later. But we don't want that. We want there to be an equal amount of like options here. I could go ahead and alt click and drag, right? Which I could do this way, which is kind of neat actually, because then if I hit Control D, it'll duplicate it at the same distance. And then I could hit it again and duplicate it, and then I can select these and maybe move them over so they're more centered, holding down Shift. If I group these together, hitting Control G, I could just kind of center all these objects together by selecting them and hitting that. And then actually, I want this to be centered in the, not on the selection, but in my artboard. So I'm going to align to artboard right up here. I just changed that because when you drag and click on different objects and you go to the align panel, it's automatically going to align it to selection. But I wanted to make sure they're all centered in my artboard or in my canvas, and so I just had to make sure that I wanted to select all those that I wanted to align to the artboard, and then just change this option up here to align to artboard. I feel like I've said that a lot. The other option, right, would be to blend something together. And so here's a cool way to show you how things blend. I'm going to create a line, but it's going to be on an angle. And then I am going to hit Alt, and I'm going to drag and just make another copy. And then up here in the properties panel, there's an option under transform that says flip horizontally, so I can mirror it quickly, right? So I'm going to just select that. And then I'm going to grab both of these objects, and I'm going to go into object, blend, make. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a certain amount of steps in between automatically. And how you can determine those steps is you go under object, blend options. And under here, you can choose how those options or how those objects are created in between one and the other. So whatever this one is on this side and the one you grabbed, it will blend those objects together by creating different iterations or instances in between those two. And then it kind of changes the shape in order to make it look like it's blending together. And so if I actually hit cancel on this and I wanted to change this, right? So let's undo the blend, and let me flip this again in a different way so that you guys will see how it blends now. And I select these two objects. You have to have two objects selected in order to do that. I go to blend. I go to blend options, smooth color, cool. I want the orientation to remain the same. If I wanted it to align to the path, I would select that. I'm going to hit OK there. And then I'm going to go back to object, blend, and make. And then it blends them together. It's also blending like the size of this. Maybe I could select this and go to object, blend options, and I could change this specified steps. I could specify how many steps I want in there. So if I wanted 5, it would increase that. It's decreasing it as it goes, probably because of the angle that I have of the object. But this is this is another option that you could do to create these legs here if you want to. The other thing I would do if you do that is to also go to Object, Blend, and Expand. So it creates separate little options for you to have separate control of, right? But I'm just going to create it like this. I just created one and then Alt dragged and then duplicated it, right? And then group them together. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a little foot on here as well. Let's grab the rectangle tool. Start with a rectangle. I'm going to create a little rectangle like this. I want this to actually be a fill and not a stroke. So I'm going to go up here and swap that. And then I'm going to hit V and drag this down here. And I want to kind of round out the top part of this, but not the bottom. And so I'm going to go up here and grab my direct selection tool, which allows me, just like it shows here, to grab different vertices and change the way the object is, right? If you hit A on your keyboard, it will also select that tool. And I'm just going to drag over top of these, actually just this one, and holding down Shift, I'm going to drag over that one. You can tell that I'm selected on only these two because you get these little buttons here. And then I'm going to drag these down, which gives me kind of like this half circle shape. Like a foot. A simple little foot. Maybe make that smaller. I grabbed my regular selection tool again, hitting V. And if I hold down Alt and Shift, it will scale the object from the center of it. If you're holding down Alt, it will scale it from the center. If you just hold down Shift, it will just scale the object. Oh, come on. Let me just do that again. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Is it only selected on... I want it shorter vertically. Okay, I don't know why it's not doing that, but that's okay. Let's just kind of make this little foot. If you don't see the object snapping here, right? Notice that there's like these purple lines that just keep saying intersect. It allows me to see that I am snapped directly. The center path of this, the anchor point, is lined up with the path of the leg, right? And so you can move this around and you could tell where you're at by that little line. You can also align them to each other, right? Let me see here. Right there, I'm centered. And I'm going to zoom out of here. In order to turn that on, you want to go to, I think it's under View, and Smart Guides is what you'll want to make sure you have on in order to see that snapping kind of occur. And then I'm just going to duplicate this, right? So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to drag it over holding down Shift, and I'm going to make sure it says intersect there vertically. And then there's the line horizontally, which means I haven't moved it in the Y space, right? So it's perfectly even with the other foot, and then it's perfectly centered with that leg. And I'm going to let go on there, and then I'm just going to hit Control D because it will duplicate it. I hit it twice there, and then it duplicates it evenly spaced, right? So I did all that work in just seconds. And then I'm going to select all of this, and I'm actually just going to group these with this section. So I want to ungroup these from each other. Oh, that one is not grouped. But I'll just select that line. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag and select these. And then I'm just going to group all of like the black leg part together. All right. And so we have like the base part of our object drawn in here. We can add a floor in. If I go to here, I could add a straight line. You guys can always do that later. I'm going to get to some other stuff, some other building tools here. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool again, and I am going to select actually I'm going to hit I on my keyboard, and I'm going to color pick the conveyor belt. I'm going to shut the stroke off, so I just have the fill color. And then over here, I'm going to make sure I'm selected on the correct layer. The conveyor belt, I'm done with that, so I'm going to lock that one up. And then I'm going to select that rectangle tool. I'm going to just kind of draw like this box. I don't really necessarily want a full square box. And I'm just going to kind of drag it. Let's say this is the box that the object's going to come out of or maybe go into. So maybe I want it centered. This might change. I can always just put it on here and then move it around, right? I'm going to label this machine. And I don't want a stroke on it, but I do want to round these edges a little bit. So I'm just going to do that. And maybe I want to create another little box on the top. That's maybe a different color. Not shift, but that'll be good. V, grab these, just kind of align them at the top. Maybe I want to drop this down a little bit more and round it out at the top a little bit. Maybe this one is a red or yellow color, maybe a yellow color, maybe. Let's keep it that. And then I want this object to not be in the front, but I kind of want to put it in behind. I'm going to make it a little bit skinnier here. Bring this up, holding down shift. And I want to push this object behind this one here. And so there's a couple different ways that you can do it. You can hit control and control in your square brackets, right? Your open and closed square brackets, which look like this. So you can do control plus, not that one, this or this one. And that will push objects either in front of each other or behind each other. Another way you could do it, it's called arranging, right? You're arranging it, your layers, you're arranging your objects that are on that layer because we're working on the singular layer. But I'm going to expand this out just slightly. I'm not going to hold down shift. I don't want it perfect. Maybe bring this down a little bit. Center these. The other way to do it is if you click the object and you right click and under arrange, you can bring front, bring forward. So if I wanted it on top of, if I had a bunch of different objects on one layer and I wanted that one all the way at the front, I could bring it to the front or send it all the way to the back by holding shift control, open or close bracket. I'm going to save my panel here. I am going to, let's see, kind of look at these. Let's add a light at the top. Let's add actually some little side things here. So I'm going to create another kind of skinnier looking box heavy. It's going to be kind of like the opening here. And I'm going to change the color. Or, you know what I want to do is I'm going to bring this corner down. So I'm going to hit A. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to grab that singular vertex up here in the upper left, and I'm just going to arrow key down. I can even hold down, and it's going to kind of give me this angled look. And then I'm going to select if I hold and grab my direct selection tool, I can kind of round that off if I wanted to. Just that little corner. And then I'm going to hit V, and I'm going to send that to the back, right? So I want it just behind it, this thing. So I can either select this and control open bracket to bring it to the front, or I'm sorry, close bracket to bring it to the front, or open bracket to put it behind, right? Just keep in mind that when your layers are on top of each other here, layer order matters over here in your layers as well. So if I wanted this machine thing to be behind the conveyor belt, I would just drag this layer behind the conveyor belt layer, and then all of a sudden it pushes this object behind that, right? So keep that in mind too. If you illustrate something in the front, but you're like, oh, it needs to go back, you can do that. I am going to duplicate this, holding Alt. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to bring it over here, and then I'm going to mirror it up in the top there. And I think these are about the same distance. This one still needs to go over a little bit more, so I'm just going to arrow key that over. That looks good. And let's create maybe a couple little lights at the top. I'm going to grab that rectangle tool again. What color do we want to make this? Maybe the darker. No, let's make it the gray. All right, V, I'm going to drag this down here. Notice I'm starting to lose the saturation plus the background saturation are very close to each other. So I might just shut my background layer off so that I can see what I'm doing here. Another option to do, right? And this is a great way to work in general to tell if you have enough contrast and saturation in your artwork, is to work in a gray, a 50% gray right here. So if you just turn your background color to, like, if you bring your color selector and drag it all the way to the center of this area, this side right here on the left, and you hit OK, that's 50% gray. And so anything that you make should really kind of stand out with that. Notice that I kind of lost the stroke on here, but I know that the stroke is at 50% gray color. So as long as I change the saturation a little bit, it's not going to interfere with the rest of the colors here. So if you need to work like that, you can also work with a black or a white background, but this is the best way to show contrast in your images. And so I've got this little, I'm going to lock that background as the gray. I've got this little option here. I'm going to Alt Shift drag over this way. I want to grab all of these, well, just these top ones. And before I do that, I'm actually going to create the little bubble top. So in order to create the bubble top, I'm going to actually grab another rectangle. And I'm going to create the rectangle like that. And I'm going to hit A, select these two vertexes, and I'm going to drag these down. And then I'm going to grab this and center it. Not to the artboard, but to the selection. I want them to center to each other. There we go. I'm going to delete this other shape I made. And then what I'm going to do is this one, I'm going to change red. Just hit I, do that. Select these. I might make that a less red color because that's pretty intense. Hold down Shift here. Maybe make this shorter. And let's change that intensity a bit. And then I'm going to duplicate this. Grab the whole thing. I'm going to hit Alt and then drag, holding down Shift. And then I'm going to change this one to, actually I'm going to change this one back. I'm going to change that to green. Some sort of green, maybe less vibrant, less intense. I'm going to grab these two and I'm going to group them together. And then I'm going to center them with this object here. Oh, let me undo that real quick. I want to group these first. Control G. And now when I grab these, when they're grouped, it treats it like one whole singular object. And so I'm probably going to want to have separate control of these, possibly the colors. So I'm just going to create a new layer and I'm going to ungroup these. And I'm going to select one at a time. I'm going to group these together instead. The base and the top of the thing. Control G. Select this one. Control G. I accidentally rotated that. If you do so, you can come up here into your transform panel and you can reset your rotation right there. Just going to hit 0. And then I'm going to grab this one and drag it up onto its own layer. Name this green light. Create a new one. Grab this. Move it up here. Red light. And now later on, outside of class tonight, I am going to add some more detail in here, maybe some levers or something like that. Just keep in mind that any levers and stuff that you add on here, right, are going to want to be on their own separate layer if they're going to move separately. Because I want to get to the robot arm section of this. And so I'm just going to save this. I'm going to lock these up here. And then I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to hide these. Actually, not the color palette or the background. Let's keep those up. And then let's create the, actually, no, I do want to see everything. Let's create the robotic arm. I'm going to this layer. So I'll just add more detail. You guys can add more detail to yours, make them look unique. This one I'm going to name beam. And I'm just going to create a box across the top, like a rectangle across the top that is going to represent the beam. And I want to center it to the artboard. And let's color this beam the same color, similar color, maybe up here. Let's use this one. I veered a little bit from the color palette down here, which I might stick to a little bit more. Like maybe I'll make the machine. Next time you guys see this illustration might be a little different. So in order to do that, instead of having to ungroup this, what you can do is if you have an object that are grouped together with different objects, you can double click it. And what that does is it solos that object in that group when I grab on it and allows me to change the color. Now, if I go though to select a like color pick here, sometimes this doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. It looks like it's working right now. So that's not a problem. And then when I double click off of it, it still is grouped together, but it just allowed me to go in there, solo grab it, and then change the color, right? I'm going to save this. I'm not into this color palette right now, so I'll likely change it around. So we've got our beam up here. I'm going to lock that into place. I'm going to create a new layer. And then I'm going to name this one robot base. Maybe just arm base. And I'm going to create kind of like a basic oval shape for, oh, wrong one. These all have shortcuts, by the way. I hit M there to just get the rectangle tool. I'm just going to click and drag this shape here. I'm going to change the color to maybe this orangish color. That dark one right there. I'm going to round it out. Move that up so that it's centered with this beam, right? So if I drag this, it says intersect right there. I'm good. This is going to shift left and right maybe on the thing. Maybe let's make it look, let's see. They're all kind of rounded like that. Let's make it look a little bit different. Maybe we make it look more like the base I have in the project. All right, yeah. Okay. So let me create a rectangle again. Make it a little bit longer, a little wider there. I'm going to hit A, drag and select these ones here. I'm going to actually turn my background all white because it will be easier for you guys to see. Are you guys having a hard time seeing like the contrast and stuff? Because when I drag and select the line, that the little selection line is gray. So I didn't know if that's kind of hard for you guys to see. Let me just change it to a light blue. That one works. Okay. I'm gonna lock that so I don't keep grabbing it. That will happen if you guys don't lock it. I'm just gonna grab this and round these out. So it's vertically on the same area there. I'm going to grab this again and draw the base. Which I'll select my tool. I'm going to align those to each other, change the color of this. Maybe it's the same color as this gray, so the color pick it here, flip them, shut the stroke off, and then maybe round the edge on these corners. Hit A, selection, direct selection tool, select that one, select this one, and round them. Maybe all of these are rounded. So I select these two and these two and then round them both. There we go. That looks neat. Sure, it looks so cute. I'm going to save that. Let me move this kind of up. Maybe I don't want it to, when it's shuffling on the, when it moves back and forth on this beam, maybe I want that up top. Maybe I want it above. Who knows? I think that'll look cool right there. Holding shift can move that. Are you guys kind of understanding the concept of how to illustrate for animation right now? When I look at this, right? This GIF, how many, I'm going to zoom in here. How many of these parts on this robot, when you're watching, how many of them move, right? So if I get out of this view, come on. Ah, I froze it up. There we go. Notice that when it comes in, this section moves here. This arm moves here. This section of the arm, the top part of the arm moves. Let's see what else. The hand moves. And these little finger claws move, right? And so it is pretty cool. And it is a lot of shape building, like, yeah, like puzzles. Illustrating for animation is fun. It's just a little tedious, right? But we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, minus the joints, right? Because the joints can be added to the arm in certain ways, unless you're going to animate them separately. In this one, the little cog animates in the elbow joint. They also animate here, so those were separated out onto their own separate layers. But when you look at this and start breaking it down and look at your, when you start looking at your, like these, and start breaking it down, you're going to notice, right? Because we're at 8 o'clock and this, I'm not going to get this illustration done. Obviously it's going to take longer. But when you look at this and you're trying to break out how this arm would move, this would be separate. This would be its own separate layer. This arm would be its own separate layer. The wrist joint would be a separate layer. Possibly this little thing, like I would call it like the little spark guy, would be a separate layer. On this one, very similar to the animation that's already on your module, obviously separate layer, separate layer, separate layer. And then each one of these, you could create one and then we could always duplicate it later inside of After Effects, or you could always duplicate it inside of Illustrator, whatever, but each one of these would have to be on the separate layer, like these little grabby finger things. Keith asked, would I say the base is also moving since it comes to the center? The base of what in particular? Like the base of this? This and this would be its own. These two would most likely move together. No, I would start well, let me get to Keith's real quick with Keith's. Like this base part, I'm going to create like if I take this right now, holding down oops, not V, but Alt, dragging, holding down Shift, bring that to the top. I'm going to move over here. Obviously, I'm going to make this smaller. Holding down Alt. I'm going to bring this up here. Like that. So this would all be one separate item. And so I would leave this on its own separate layer because this might move left and right. Yeah. And then like now I would do like the shoulder joint. And then I would do the like I would create another layer that would be the arm 1, I'll label. And then I would do either you could have the wrist joint connected to arm 1, so you wouldn't have to have a wrist joint layer. But if you wanted to have a wrist joint layer, you could do like the joint. I would just say joint 1. Yeah, see? And then so you're kind of seeing that you have to break down things on separate layers just like this, like the way it would move, right? Because if you're looking at like that robot arm, it's going down, it's grabbing. Think of your arm and how many moving parts there are in your arm. You've got your shoulder, you've got your upper arm, you've got your elbow, you've got your lower arm, your forearm, you've got your wrist joint, and then you've got your hand, and then you've got fingers, right? If I were to do this just as a base, obviously a robot's not going to have as much mobility as our actual arm. And so I would do it like I had before. I would do a shoulder joint. So I would have the base, the arm base. I would have a shoulder joint. I would have arm 1. I would have maybe I would have a joint for like the elbow area, right? The elbow joint, which I would just have like some kind of cog there. Um, Possibly that's optional, right? And then I would, because you could always illustrate it onto the lower section of the arm, which it would move with that lower section of the arm. So as long as I'm not animating that joint separately, then you would be okay. And then I would label this one. Maybe I would even do arm lower in this one, or arm 2, because I have it arm 1 as the first one. I would actually probably move this here up to the top, and I would just name this wrist joint, because it is essentially like an arm, right? It's just a robotic arm. And so it's going to have a wrist. And then I would do, like if I had it like the other one, I would do finger or grabber 1, and then duplicate this, have another layer that would say grabber 2. So I hope that makes sense for you guys. So as you're illustrating these, you'll, create on this separate shoulder joint. I would do like the other one I did. I would select the ellipse tool. I would grab not caps, but holding down Shift. Take one, put that there. I would hit V and then grab Alt and hold down Shift and have another one here. And then holding down Alt and Shift, I would make this smaller. Bring this up maybe a little bit more. And then I would grab both of these and either weld them together like this or use that shape builder tool over there. And then I'd likely, if I'm doing this like the one I had before, I've got the ellipse tool. I draw another circle here, holding down Shift, and change the color. Let's make it a little darker. Okay. V, Alt, Shift, drag down here, Alt, Shift, scale down so it makes it center. It scales from the center, remembering holding down Alt. And then I'm just going to take these and center them all together. If I center them this way and then hit the align, vertical align, it'll put everything in the center, and I don't want that, right? But let's say I have these like this, and this would be my this like shoulder joint that I would have up here. And then I would move to the arm. I'd lock these two in place so I don't move them. And then I would create an arm object. So I could, here's another way to create a shape if you guys want like a perfect line, like a perfect straight line like this. Well, let me do it like this. When you use the line tool, you just hold down shift and drag something. Then we're going to add a stroke to that. Just go over here and select the stroke and do a solid. And then under the stroke tool or panel, I'm going to increase the size here. So let's say I'd want the width of my arm to be probably bigger than that. Let's do 50. That looks good. I'm going to add a butt cap on this, or a round cap. So it's looks like this nice oval, right? Here's just different options on how you guys can make shapes. And then I'm going to object, and then I'm going to expand that and expand the fill and the stroke. Okay. And then it makes it like a shape. So there's not like a stroke line here, which, then I can move back here, and I want this because the arm should be underneath the shoulder joint. So I would just move this layer below the shoulder joint there. And then maybe shorten this a little bit so it's not so big. And then then now I'd create a second arm, or on this first arm, select that layer. Maybe I want to add a little bit more. Maybe I want to add that like that elbow joint onto this arm, right? So I'm going to select, holding down shift, creating a circle, kind of aligning that to this arm. Maybe I want to change a color to this one. I want to create another circle in the center, so I could hit Control C, and if I hit Shift Control V, it pastes on top. It's called paste in place. And then if I change the color to this one and hold down Alt and Shift, it allows me to kind of center this circle in between this one the same. And then I could change this color to this orange, and just keep these on the same layer. And then I have both my first arm and my elbow joint right there. Save this. And then I already have like most of my thing created. And then let's say like my robot arm, let's say I wanted to make the second arm very similar. I could hit Control C, and if I just hit regular Control V, it's just going to paste it somewhere on your artboard. Now, here's something for you guys to keep in mind. I had this, it's on this arm layer. I copied on here, and then I just hit V, but it's on the arm layer, right? And I'm like, oh no, wrong layer. I want to move it. Over here, there are these little boxes that are highlighted whenever you're selected on an object on that layer. And so let's say I needed to move this to its own separate layer. I'm just going to grab this little box, and with my layer already created, I'm just going to click and drag that to the new layer, and then it automatically moves it up to here, right? And so this arm is still on this layer. I can hide that. And this arm is now on the new layer here. And so then if I want to grab this, and maybe I want to make it shorter, I'm going to hold down shift and make it smaller and move this over here. I'm going to keep everything relatively straight because I'll start rotating things inside of After Effects. That's another thing, is to, it's going to look a little funny here right now, but we're going to update where the anchor points are inside of After Effects, which will allow us to rotate these objects from different space. And so just making sure everything's really flat looking straight. There's not a lot of bends and stuff in here right away, it will help you further on down the road. If you do it, it's not that big of a deal. But this just will help you when you're putting your anchor points in the appropriate spots on your objects, right? And so I want this layer to be actually under the arm one. So I'm going to grab this and drag this down. And then let's say that this object right here, I wanted to be separate because it's its own wrist. Like maybe this is the wrist joint, or we create a wrist joint similar like I had before, which was a rectangle, which I had rounded the holding down A, these two, I think. Actually, because it's like, I would actually round all of this to make it kind of like a pill shape. Maybe make it a little bigger. You can continue rounding if you do that. Move it here. Maybe the wrist color is the same color as this joint. Like the little thing there. Oops, I accidentally made it on my arm 2 layer. I'm going to click it because that's selected already and move it to the wrist joint layer and then drag that layer below here so I can see, right? So you guys can kind of start to see if I move the anchor point of the object right now and then I start rotating this. Oh, I guess it didn't do that. Isn't this the anchor point tool? Reference point. Never mind. Don't use this as like an anchor point. You guys don't worry about that. We'll just change it inside of After Effects because the anchor point should be up here because that's where the point of motion is happening, which we'll talk about more. But then when I move this, right, it gives me a different range of motion. And then maybe I'd add the little fingers or grabbers here. Actually, I'm going to do that little welding thing. So maybe I want to add a new, instead of grabber, I just name this welder. Delete this layer. Ooh, undo that. Delete that layer here. Make sure if you're going to delete a layer, you just use the little trash icon right on your layer panel. And maybe the little welder looks very similar to this. Just a rounded rectangle, but a different color. I'm likely going to change this illustration up so when you guys come into class on Tuesday, it'll look a little different. Maybe the welder is on top, right? So maybe I want to keep this. I'm going to move this little welder over here and leave this on top of the wrist joint right there. So I can always drag this down as well and just kind of put it in between the second arm and the wrist joint, and it stays there. And then maybe I want to add onto here like a little line or a little nozzle. Here's a great way if you guys want to make a triangle. The star tool actually will help you make a good triangle. I'm going to draw a star holding down shift and it'll keep it straight. And then under, where can you change the amount of points? I think that actually, if you just click once, that's what you do. Click once and we'll change the points to 3 and just hit OK. And that way you have a triangle. Perfect shaped triangle, or like equal. Let's hit A. I'm going to select this top one. Maybe round this out just a little bit. Maybe take this one. Maybe I select hitting, I'm going to hit V and maybe thin this out a little bit so it's not so. There we go. Not so perfect shape. And then I'm going to rotate it, rotate my object. Actually, I'm going to rotate this to be straight. So instead of 45 up here, I'm going to select 0 and then just center that right there. And then this little welder is going to kind of, I think the welder is going to like hang off. The welder, let's start it at 0 like this. Let's change the shape a little bit down like this. I'm going to rotate it. Holding down shift, you can rotate it perfectly. And then normally it would go here. I'm going to change the color to that. And I actually think I want this to have like a little rounded area there. So going back here, I'm going to select my ellipse. I'm going to create a circle. And I'm going to grab this and kind of move it up to where they meet up close to perfectly, like that. And then I'm going to just grab the circle, kind of extend the little edges out to match. Control I. Look how, if you notice that I can like super zoom in onto this object and they're all still really sharp. And that's the power of like the vector, right? I want to make sure that maybe they're intersected here and here. And then I'm going to just bring those little sides in a little bit. And this is the great thing about the shape builder tool. If I hit that Shift M, oh, hold on. If I select both of these and hit Shift M, I can just grab, I can roll over this section and it creates this like ice cream cone shaped object. And then I can just click off, grab that and move it and just delete these. Delete. And then maybe I'm going to hit A and select these little corners right here and just round those off a little bit. So it creates kind of like this, you know, like the ping shape, like a locator shape right here. And then maybe that would stay there, or maybe this is something that is eventually rotated permanently like that. But I have kind of like this little welding option. I probably just, for the sake of not knowing how I'm going to have it work, have it vertical like that and just kind of lined up here. And so this is kind of how you create, well, this is how you create illustrations for animation. Really the biggest thing is making sure that anything that's going to move is on its own separate layer in here. You'll end up with layers, like lots of layers and stuff, but it's going to help you in the long run. Lena asked, so if you intersect two different shapes, you should fuse the shapes. Yeah, if you want one single shape, right? That object, I wasn't going to have the circle move from the triangle. I wanted it all one shape, like that ice cream cone shape or that teardrop shape. And so that is why I took the circle. It's like, it is like you said, like the puzzle aspect of it, right? You take the circle, add it to the triangle, and then you fuse those shapes together, weld them, and you get that thing. But I was going to have extra space on the side, and so I just used the shape builder tool. But if you were to use the weld tool with that, it would have welded all of it together, so you would have had like that kind of rounding shape there, which would have been weird. Yeah, good question. You asked that again. When should we start illustrating the project? Today. That's your kind of work over the weekend, is to illustrate the project, because you don't want to get behind. And I feel like if you guys wait to start illustrating, you're going to get to the rigging process and then the animating process, and you're going to have a bunch of work on your hands. So I highly recommend starting your illustrations this weekend. Even if you don't get it done, maybe close to done. And then kind of come ready to class on Tuesday to start rigging and animating and stuff. Because what I'm going to do over the weekend or tomorrow at some point is finish illustrating this. And because I want to take more time. I mean, obviously it's almost 2.5 hours of class and I've gotten this done. If it were just me doing this on my own, I would have probably, because I wouldn't have been explaining it, it would have been quicker for me to work. But I am not a fan of the color palette right now. I'm just kind of blocking things out. I'm going to take a little bit more time, make this look nicer, and then we will bring this into, it'll be ready for you guys to see on Tuesday. And in that point, we'll bring it into After Effects and start rigging and preparing the animation for, or preparing the file for animation. So if you guys kind of want to stay caught up, I would definitely get that done. I'm gonna stop here. And if you guys have any more questions, you guys can ask them right now to me before I end class, because I think you guys have kind of learned pretty much what you need to know right now. In order to create an illustration. If it's similar to this, that's great. I mean, like, I don't care if you copy this, whatever. I know, Elena, you asked in the beginning. If it's just easier for you guys to do this because you're learning the new techniques, go ahead and just use my illustration and copy what I do right now. If you guys want a little bit more creative freedom, then that's fine. I suggest not using this color palette though, because it sucks. And I'm telling you guys that right now. But if you guys want to just kind of create it really similar, that's fine. So when you're importing the Lena asks if when you does the layer order matter when you're exporting the project into After Effects? It will come into After Effects in the layer order here. So if your layer order is correct inside of Illustrator, it will be correct when you bring it inside of After Effects. And so I'm just future saving myself time, because if not, that's not that big of a deal. But then you're going to have to order it inside of, you're going to have to change your layer order inside of After Effects. Correct. Yes, Keith. So we're just creating the illustration right now. And then on Tuesday, we're going to start prepping this for animation. We're going to learn about rigging and parenting. Same thing, interchangeable words, right? We're going to rig / parent all of the moving objects in here. We're going to adjust where the anchor points are going to be. And hopefully maybe we can start animating on Tuesday. We're also going to go through our questions and stuff then. So if you guys have questions about the illustrations and stuff over the weekend while you're doing this, using the time for the participation question, that's a great time to use it to ask any questions about using Illustrator. And then we'll go over those questions first thing on Tuesday. We'll start to get all the parenting and all that, the rigging and stuff done. And then if we get to animating on Tuesday, we will. But if not, we'll be animating on Thursday. Yeah. Well, what is your question? Is your question about animation? Are you going to remember it, or do you want to just ask it now and I can answer it for you? Because maybe it will be a question that I'll be like, oh, we're going to touch later on in this in class, so you don't have to worry about it. Please come up with a better color palette than this one. I'm not a fan of the one I first picked. It's harder than you think working with a limited color palette. I will say that. Um, yes, correct. Or what you could do is create one lever and then duplicate. So you could duplicate that layer. You don't have to create a separate kind of like the cog thing, right? We can duplicate. I created the one cog and then I'll just duplicate that in After Effects. So all you would have to do is create one lever and we'll duplicate that inside of After Effects. All we'll do is just duplicate the layer, but we'll do it once the anchor point is in place, because then you don't have to duplicate the layer and then change the anchor point on all of them. These are quick little things that you'll learn, will save you just a minuscule amount of time, but that time adds up when you start stacking all these little things together. And so, yes, what I would do is I would create one lever and leave it there. And then when we're importing it inside of After Effects, I would change on that layer, that lever layer, I would change the anchor point of it, and then I would duplicate that layer inside of After Effects, because your anchor point is already saved on there. Saves you so much more time than either manually making three of them inside of Illustrator, and then when you bring them inside of After Effects, you have to change the anchor point on each one. But if you have the anchor point already set and then you duplicate the layer inside of After Effects, the anchor point on all of those levers are going to be exactly the same. And it's just gonna, yeah, say, yeah. So those little things are tips that you guys, those are great questions to ask because these are little tips that maybe you're not thinking about right now because you guys aren't comfortable doing the illustrations for animation yet. But I want to prep you guys because we're going to get into um, some other projects pretty soon where you're creating larger illustrations like this. And I think this is a great way. This is a great project to kind of introduce you guys into not only Adobe Illustrator, but how to create the illustrations for animation so that when you guys come into the next project, you won't have to learn all this stuff. You'll already know it. And it'll save you guys a little bit more. It'll give you guys a little bit more know-how to get more complex looking scenes and have a little bit more practice with this. The robot arm, the anchor points are going to be at all of the joints, right? So and we'll obviously that's all what parenting is, and rigging. So we're going to talk and really go into depth on that on Tuesday. But so since you asked, I'll tell you right now. Think of your arm, right? My arm is here, and my arm initially moves at the shoulder. So the shoulder joint would have an anchor point here. Then this arm, like, so the upper arm moves at the shoulder. So you would move the upper arm anchor point to the shoulder part. And then the lower arm moves at the elbow. So I would take the lower arm's anchor point and move it up to where the elbow is. And then your hand moves at the wrist. So I would take my hand and move the anchor point at where the wrist would be. And then obviously my fingers have different spots. So like when you start looking at things and you're looking at how they move, it's like a chain effect, right? And so then my fingers, their anchor point would be at the base where my hands are, right? And then you got each little moving section here. We're not going to get that super detailed for that's why we're doing a robot arm, right? Because a robot arm is not as detailed as a hand. But then each of these moving parts, like when you move your arm, right? Other parts move along with it. And so we're going to connect all those moving parts together after we change all those anchor points, right? And when we move one thing, other things will move along with it. And so it makes animating a lot easier. And it makes animating things that move in different sequences or like a layered movement. That's how you create that kind of layered movement. But the anchor point, when you're rigging something or parenting something, think of where the base of that motion happens, and that's where the anchor point goes. And we're not going to change the anchor points inside of Illustrator. That will get changed inside of After Effects because that's where it matters. Lena also asked, would we have to figure out where to place the anchor points on everything that moves when we illustrate? Yeah. So when we bring it inside of After Effects, like the lever, like Keith was talking about, if you're moving a lever, where does it move? It moves at the base of the lever. The movement's not gonna happen at the top of it where you're grabbing onto. It's gonna move from wherever it's connected, right? And so the anchor point would be at the base of that lever. Sorry, lots of words, lots of talking today. Is this all kind of making sense to you guys? I think you guys, I feel like you guys are understanding it because you're asking questions that go along with this. I noticed that each segment of the robot arm is a different layer. Does it have it doesn't have the joint in the same layer? That's why I was confused about where the anchor point is on specific arms. Okay, yeah, you guys are getting it though. Well, because like the shoulder, obviously I modeled this after the one inside of After Effects. So if you watch this, move in, watch, you're going to see the shoulder rotates, that little shoulder joint that I made, right? The arm rotates, but the elbow section doesn't rotate, right? The only part on that elbow that rotates is the cog, and I manually added that in later inside of After Effects and not while I was illustrating. But because that elbow doesn't rotate, I didn't put it on its own separate layer. If you maybe wanted to future that and make sure that the cog could rotate at the same time like the elbow joint would rotate, maybe the elbow has isn't a perfect circle, right? Maybe it looks a little different or has different edges. You could put that on a separate layer if you want to, but because mine when I was illustrating this was gonna move with the arm, like this lower arm, this base arm here, I didn't put it on a separate layer. But then this section of the arm is on its own separate layer right here, right? And then I have like this little wrist area that I made. Um, and that's on its own little separate area, right? So this upper arm with the little wrist joint, the little blue part with the cog is all on one layer. But then this little um hand section with the little part that jutes out, that little white part that connects it, that's on its own separate layer. And then the little fingers are on each one of their separate layers. So if you watch this and see when it comes in and kind of break down how it's moving, you'll be able to see each little section, anything that moves is on its own separate layer. And so you can start to break it down and be like, okay, that's on its own separate layer. This is on the same layer. Like all of this base stuff is on the same layer. But the whole shoulder part with the cog and stuff is separate from the base. And you can see how I built this in let me get this back to 100%. You can see how I built that one in this version 1. And then version 2 and 3. So you guys can also watch these and follow along with these if you want to build your robot arm like this. And then you could just add a conveyor belt portion of it too. Do you guys have any more questions for tonight? I'm going to save this, Control S, close it out. Yeah, not a problem. All right, guys, I will see you on Tuesday. We'll go over any questions you have for the participation questions. If it pertains to the illustration, you know, great, ask that, and I'll help you guys out on that so that you can make those changes before you start animating. And then we'll talk about importing into After Effects and doing all the rigging and changing the anchor points and all that stuff. And then hopefully get to animation. So oh, Natalie, what's up? In class, hiding. Ooh, you hiding in there, girl. Right at the last minute. I love it. I've been wanting to learn rigging in A8 and I'm excited. Yeah, not a problem. You guys don't have to be afraid to say something in the chat, you know. I like it when we chit chat, so. But I think it's really funny. That made me laugh inside. You know the game Whack-A-Mole? Like, the little thing pops up. Natalie just shows up. She's like, "What's up? I'm excited about rigging. Thanks for class." Just funny. It just makes me giggle inside. All right, guys. I shall let you go. Sayonara. Have a good weekend. Enjoy illustrating this. Have fun with it. I think you guys are gonna like this project a lot. It's definitely like a much bigger project than the other ones that we've been working on. All right, you guys. Have a good night. I'll see you later.